I am Susan Scott at IUPUI, ePortfolio coordinator there. My colleague, Dr. Susan Kahn, is director. Today we'd like to engage you in thinking about the relationship between high-impact practices and ePortfolios. As a reminder, in 2007, George Kuh at Indiana University worked with leaders from the LEAP initiative at AAC&U to identify practices based on data from the National Survey of Student Engagement. The 10 practices have been adopted across many kinds of colleges throughout the U.S. At IUPUI, for instance, all 10 of them are in use by somebody or other. Our own research, along with that and many others, confirms that the impact is very significant for these practices in deepening student learning. We find them especially valuable because they bridge the curriculum and co-curriculum. In 2013, Kuh identified 8 characteristics that are common to high-impact practices that may explain why they foster engagement. Not only all of these connections, experience with diversity, structured reflection, enabling integration of new learning, a number of characteristics that in fact also apply to well-designed ePortfolios. Not all ePortfolios are equally effective or equally relevant for this kind of learning, but most are, and in the same way, many student characteristics of student service learning or capstone projects or others are not necessarily all equally effective either. We think that the generalization is reasonable for both. It seems to us, in fact, that ePortfolios have an affinity for strengthening high-impact practices, and many of our most committed users at IUPUI work in the high-impact practice areas. We have examples of ePortfolios in concert with nearly every high-impact practice, and we'd like to examine that a little bit more closely.
Randy Bass argues that high-impact practices generally involve what he calls integrative social pedagogies that ask students to represent their learning holistically for an authentic audience. He says that such pedagogies help students find a sense of purpose and meaning in their learning by connecting and reframing. Composing a portfolio that presents their learning requires students to reflect on how the parts relate to the whole in order to develop a coherent digital structure with menus, links, and explanatory pages. So an ePortfolio is inherently integrative in that sense. Engaging in this process often helps students see their own learning differently as they look at it from a different point of view. So we argue that the ability of ePortfolios to make learning visible to both the creator and the viewers of an ePortfolio make ePortfolio a meta-high-impact practice. Just as metadata are data that tell us about other data, just as metacognition is cognition about cognition, so ePortfolios are a high-impact practice that tells us about other high-impact practices. We, of course, need to build a case with evidence to justify this idea. Such evidence is beginning to accumulate in the Connect to Learning project that we heard about in the last session. We used a course survey with questions that were mapped to the NESI survey on high-impact practices. Some of this evidence is being included in the IG, which is a great venue for publishing these kinds of findings and inquiries. I'd like to conclude by encouraging you to go forth and explore the idea of ePortfolios as a meta-high-impact practice that enables students to make sense of and integrate learning from a specific high-impact practice or a number of them. In this sense, ePortfolios can be the one ring that binds them all, that incorporates and integrates other high-impact practices. So I hope that you'll all look into this further, and we are going to do that ourselves.